poetry or music.
Began 100 years ago. Some still think of it as the Great War. In many ways, it's more terrible than the Second War. Look at war memorials like this one here, all over Britain, and France and Germany, which list those who died in that war at such massive cost on all sides, and to so little purpose.
Wars, sadly, are still being waged all over the world. But memories of the First Great War of the last century are still powerful, and the songs and poetry it created still haunt us.
Tonight we commemorate especially the soldiers who fought on the Western Front, in France and Belgium, in the British Expeditionary Force, and chiefly British and Irish Tommies, but also the Indian troops and Caribbean Labour battalions.
Of course, other troops from the Dominions and the United States fought and died alongside them in Flanders. What they went through was only part of a greater suffering shared by millions of other soldiers and civilians elsewhere. We don't forget the women, the nurses and munitions workers.
We present a collage of memories, songs and poems from the First World War.
A garland of poppies. To take the pain. As soon as rebellion's gone, we feel just as gay as then, but we never get up till the sergeant brings our breakfast up to bed. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. One that we won with ace in hand, breaking up gun and apple jam. 4-4's right turn, how we spend the money we earn. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.
In a quiet Midland town, a schoolgirl, Vera Britton, wrote in her diary on August the 4th, 1914,
"Late as it is, and almost too excited to write as I am, I must make some effort to chronicle the stupendous events of this remarkable day, absolutely unparalleled in the history of the world. Never before has the war strength of each individual nation been of such great extent. When the war begins, 14 millions of men will be engaged in the conflict. Attack is possible by earth, water, and air, and the destruction attainable by modern war machines is unthinkable and past imagination."
This morning, we learned that war is formally declared between France and Germany. Germany has declared that if her troops are allowed to pass unmolested through Belgian territory, she will protect her interests at the end of the war. Belgium has indignantly refused any such violation of international honour, and the King of the Belgians has appealed to King George for aid. Sir Edward de Grey declared that Britain would see that Belgian neutrality was preserved. Sir Edward's statement that "we are prepared" evoked tremendous cheering in the House. It is rumoured that the Secretaryship for War has been offered to Lord Kitchener.
The prevailing mood in the early August days of 1914 was one of euphoria. The weather had a lot to do with it. Charles Carrington remembers the approach of war while he was staying at a country vicarage at the age of 17.
I lay in a hammock and ate too many plums in the garden full of delphiniums flowering week after week in that splendid summer of 1914. We started a grand offensive against wasps' nests, and were not very brave. One of the girls was frightened of the dark, even more than of wasps, and when I walked with her to a late party, I shamefully showed that a very dark lane made me feel creepy too. I might have gone to school for another year, but one day there was a crisis reported in the morning paper, and I willfully said that I would enlist as a soldier.
The Battle of Mons, fought on August the 23rd, 1914, was seen by Albert George, Royal Field Artillery. His battery was well aware the previous evening that they would be in action the following day. Even at this early stage of the war, there were no heroics.
That night we formed a ring and had an open-air concert, just to keep our spirits up, and also to amuse the civilians, gathered round us as if we were superhuman, being British soldiers. Many a mind was far away while we were singing the songs, comic, patriotic and sentimental, and there was many a wet eye. Men thinking of the wives, children and the girls they had left behind. Nobody can imagine how a song, sung as some soldiers sing, will turn the stoutest heart or wet the driest eye.
In the morning, Albert George's battery moved into Sangalan, west of Mons itself.
The people were just going and coming from the different churches, and the scene was very peaceful. At 10 a.m, we put our gun in action behind the Mons Canal on a small hill, about 500 yards right of the town hall. We were busy barricading and digging gun pits, and about 11:15, when they were almost finished, the order action came down. Everyone was pleased to have a go at the Germans. At about 11:20, 4 shells came whizzing through the air, and all 4 dropped in the town, terrifying the people who started screaming and running in all directions, and a panic started. But our presence soothed them a good deal. At 11:30 a.m, our battery opened fire, and the war began in earnest.
Hold your hand out, you naughty boy. Hold your hand out, you naughty boy. Last night in the pale moonlight, I saw you with a nice girl in the park. You were strolling full of joy, and you told her you never kissed a girl before. Hold your hand out, you naughty boy.
And in 1914, it was as though Britannia thought of Kaiser Bill as a naughty boy. We'd teach him. The war would be over by Christmas, people said. Recruits rushed to join up.
Lord Kitchener, Minister of War, though arrogant and usually stupid and obstructive, had flashes of genius and was a great force in recruiting. Mrs. Asquith, the Prime Minister's wife, said of him, "He is not a great man, he is a great poster."
Ewart Mackintosh wrote, "Lads, you're wanted. Go and help." On the railway carriage wall stuck the poster, and I thought of the hands that penned the call. Fat civilians wishing they could go and fight the Hun. Can't you see them thanking God that they're over 41? Girls with feathers, vulgar songs, washy verse on England's need. God, and don't we damned well know how the message ought to read. Lads, you're wanted, over there. Shiver in the morning dew, more poor devils like yourselves, waiting to be killed by you. Go and help to swell the names in the casualty lists. Help to make a column stuff for the blasted journalists. Help to keep them nice and safe from the wicked German foe. Don't let them come over here. Lads, you're wanted. Out you go.
And out they went, but there were not enough. Britain turned to the army of 161,000 trained regular soldiers, which it had created in India. In October 1914, 2 divisions of Indian infantry with their British officers arrived and were soon thrown into the first battle of Ypres.
The fighting came as a shock to soldiers more used to colonial warfare. One Indian wrote home, "This is not war, it is the end of the world."
A Sikh soldier wrote, "Wherever you look, machine guns and cannon begin to shoot, and bombs fly out which kill every man they hit. The earth is mined, and when men walk upon it, up go the men. There is no fighting face to face. Guns massacre regiments sitting 10 miles off. Put swords or pikes or staves in our hands, and the enemy over us with like arms, then indeed we should show you how to fight face to face. But if no one faces us, what can we do? No one stands up to fight us. Everyone sits in a burrow underground. You tell me to fight face to face? Die we must, but alas, not facing the foe."
General Wilcox, the British officer commanding the Indian Corps, said, "It was the Indian soldiers' good fortune to have arrived just when they were most needed. Just when 2 extra divisions could still help to stem the tide, and even if they had not done another day's fighting, they would have saved the British Army in the hour of its greatest trial."
Unfortunately for them, there were another 2 years of fighting on the Western Front ahead of them. They fought bravely, but were under-equipped and lacked the warm clothes they needed in the cold, wet Flanders winter. By Christmas, they had suffered 10,000 casualties.
A wounded sepoy wrote home, "The government has only a few men. Therefore, they send wounded men out a second time to fight. Of the British troops, about 3,000 have been killed and about 2,000 wounded. Now that the fighting has begun, it will go on for 3 years. What can be done? Great fear is on me, but a higher power must decide. 12 kings are fighting, 8 on the side of the British and 4 for the Germans. How much can I write about the war? It would be like writing another Mahabharata, the story of the war between the Pandavs and the Kauravas. I am greatly distressed in mind."
Fresh troops were on their way to the front. Wilfred Owen wrote,
The send-off. Down the close, darkening lanes, they sang their way to the siding shed and lined the train with faces grimly gay. Their breasts were stuck, all white with wreath and spray, as men's are dead. Dull porters watched them, and a casual tramp stood staring hard, sorry to miss them from the upland camp. Then, unmoved, signals nodded and a lamp winked to the guard. So secretly, like wrongs hushed up, they went. They were not ours. We never heard to which front they were sent. Nor they're there if they yet mock what women meant who gave them flowers. Shall they return to beatings of great bells in wild trainloads? A few, too few for drums and yells may creep back silent to still village wells up half-known roads.
In the afternoon, I went to a bandaging class, though it could hardly be called a class as nobody was organising it. Everyone just loitered about and did what bandages they thought they could, most of them wrong. Mrs. Ellinger, in great form, offered to show people how to do things, which she'd not learned properly herself. At about 8:30, Edward and I started out for a walk, as I felt I'd had no air all day. The evening was perfect, very still, so that no sound could be heard except the low swishing of the grass and the cry of an occasional bird. On the way home, Edward explained to me how a night attack is made. As I looked across the moor with its deep ditches and uniform darkness, I could well understand how a multitude of men, clad inconspicuously, might move across that dim surface without ever being perceived. I could almost imagine the eerie sensation of waiting for a silent advancing enemy, listening to all the varying sounds of the night and imagining many more. The rippling of a brook, the cry of a startled bird, the soft swish of the long grass in the breeze. All of which would strike with important meaning on the ear of a listening defence. As we came home, it was almost impossible to believe the war was in the world. The perfect sky, through which an occasional shooting star flashed, and the sleeping hills seemed to enshroud our little earth in a field of perfect peace. Yet only today I heard that Adrian had probably received a commission in the regular army and that Jack Maitland had joined the first volunteer regiment that will be sent abroad. Even today, it was rumoured that 100,000 British troops are now in Belgium.
This song may have been prematurely optimistic, but it became popular.
Belgium put the kibosh on the Kaiser. Europe took a stick and made him so. On his throne he loves to sit, but when trouble starts to hit, he will never sit upon it anymore.
Belgium put the kibosh on the Kaiser. Europe took a stick and made him so. On his throne he loves to sit, but when trouble starts to hit, he will never sit upon it anymore.
At home, the press whipped up feeling against anything German. People in Britain with German names changed them. The Daily Mail advised,
refused service from an Austrian or German waiter.
Another advertisement inquired, are you drinking German waters? Apollinaris comes from Germany. Perrier, the greatest of table waters, comes from France. Thanks to the British and French fleets on the seas, Perrier water is being shipped from Marseille as usual. Perrier imparts its unique delicacy and vitality to whatever it is mixed with, be it whiskey, brandy, white wine, etc. Perrier is not an expensive luxury. It is within the range of even the limited income. Perrier, the champagne of table waters, the table water of the Allies.
Yesterday I met a jolly little dachshund, the dachshund, the national dog of Germany, walking cheerfully along well bedecked in red, white and blue ribbons, and round his neck he wore this label, I am a naturalised British subject. And he seemed mighty proud of the fact too.
Little Folks magazine printed 2 sweet little verses in 1914. When a call to arms was answered by 100,000 men, there were lots of chaps in Britain twixt the age of 4 and 10 who'd have answered to their country's call and hurried off to war if Kitchener had but reduced the fighting age to 4.
And, little girls and little boys, never suck your German new toys. German soldiers licked will make darling baby's tummy ache. Parents, you should always try only British toys to buy. Though to pieces they be picked, British soldiers can't be licked.
And according to this song, the women of Britain said,
we've watched you playing cricket and every sort of game. At football, golf and polo, you men have made your name. But now your country needs you to play your part in war. And no matter what befalls you, we shall love you all the more. So come and join the forces as your fathers did before. And we don't
were enlisted by falsifying their age and grew up fast. One remembers returning to camp just before embarkation leave.
It was a Sunday evening. To return to camp, I had to catch the 6 p.m. train from Tunbridge Wells. My father and both my sisters came to see me off, and when the train came in, it stopped right by where we were standing, with a compartment full up with girls going back to Abbey Wood, where they worked on munitions. They said, "Come on, soldier, in with us." I said, "Not likely," and got into an empty compartment. The train went off, but it stopped at the next station, and all 10 of the girls got out and came in with me. So I had to keep one hand on my kit and the other on my halfpenny. Being only 17, I thought I might lose both. But they all made a fuss of me, gave me fags to smoke, and told me lots of jokes. Some of them pretty near the bone.
All over Britain, volunteers, groups of men living in the same town, working in the same factory, even supporting the same football club, banded together and formed their own powers battalions. The following line, written by a pal at the front, was published in the Bradford Evening Telegraph in July 1916. Ironically, just as the news of the tragic losses incurred by Bradford's 2 PALS battalions was beginning to come through.
The spirit of the pals. We gets our rum and lime juice, we gets our bully beef, half a dozen biscuits that break your bally teeth. We get no eggs for breakfast, but they send us over at shells. And you dive into your dugout and get laughed at by your pals. The dust blows in our dixies and there's dirt upon our mitt. So can you really wonder why the pals are full of grit? So still we mustn't grumble, for we're feeling well and fit. And our greatest consolation is, we're here to do our bit.
While the army continued its retreat from Mons to the Marne, the home front was waging battles of its own. Reform Club, Pall Mall, SW. Sir, yesterday morning came the news of a serious setback to our army. Yesterday afternoon, while Lord Kitchener was telling of the bravery of our wounded and dead, while he was asking for men to take their places, every lawn tennis court in the space near me was crowded by strapping young Englishmen and girls. Is there no way of training these laggards? The English girl who will not know the man, love, brother, friend, that cannot show an overwhelming reason for not taking up arms, that girl will do her duty and will give good help to her country. Your obedient servant, Henry Arthur Jones.
The Army and the Navy need attention. The outlook isn't healthy, you'll admit. But I've got a perfect dream of a new recruiting scheme, which I really think is absolutely it. If only other girls would do as I do, I believe that we could manage it alone. For I turn all suitors from me, but the sailor and the Tommy, I've an army and a navy of my own. On Sunday I walk up with a soldier. On Tuesday I'm taken by a tongue. On Wednesday I'm out with a baby boy scout. On Wednesday a hussar. On Thursday I gang out with a Scotty. On Friday the captain of the crew. But on Saturday I'm willing, if you'll only take the shilling, to make a man of every one of you. I teach the tenderfoot to face the powder. It gives an added luster to my skin. And I show the raw recruit how to give a chase salute, for when I'm presenting arms he's falling in. It makes you very proud to be a woman when you make a strapping soldier of a kid. And he said you put me through it, and I did.
to do it, but you went and made me love you, so I did. On Sunday I woke up with a bosun, on Monday a rifleman in green. On Tuesday I choose a sob in the blues, on Wednesday a marine. On Thursday a terrier from Tooting, on Friday a midshipman or two. But on Saturday I'm willing, if you'll only take the shilling, to make a man of every one of you.
The soldiers at the front replied,
Left, right, left, right, left, right, left.
I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to go to war. I'd rather hang around Piccadilly Underground and living on the earnings of a high-born lady. I don't want a bullet up my arse, so I don't want me bullet shot away. I'd rather stay in England, in merry, merry England, and fornicate this flaming life away.
Products in the ranks!
At Christmas 1914, the guns were silenced along much of the front, when troops on both sides met in no man's land to talk, sing carols, swap souvenirs, and play football together. It happened again in 1915, but both high commands, Allied and German, disapproved. A gunner officer recalls,
on our part of the front, the truce went on for a week. Both sides worked on their trenches quite interrupted by each other. There was only one casualty, and the Saxons immediately apologised, saying it hadn't been anything to do with them, but those so-and-so Prussians on their left. That was the only casualty during that truce. But, of course, the war was becoming a farce, and the high-ups decided that this truce must stop. Orders came through to our brigade, and so to my own battery, that fire was to be opened the following morning on a certain farm which stood behind the German support line. Our battery was to put 12 rounds of high explosives into it at 12 o'clock. As luck would have it, I was the officer who would have to do this. We sent someone over to tell the Boche, and the next morning at 11 o'clock I put 12 rounds into the farmhouse. And of course, there wasn't anybody there. But, well, that broke the truce, on our front at least.
Meanwhile, in Britain, between 1914 and 1917, a whole generation of women lost men they loved. Eleanor Fargen wrote in memory of a man she loved.
Easter Monday, in memoriam, April the 9th, 1917. In the last letter that I had from France, you thanked me for the silver Easter egg which I had hidden in the box of apples you liked to munch beyond all other fruit. You found the egg the Monday before Easter and said, I will praise Easter Monday now. It was such a lovely morning. Then you spoke of the coming battle and said, this is the eve, goodbye, and may I have a letter soon. That Easter Monday was a day for praise. It was such a lovely morning. And in our garden we sowed our earliest seeds, and in the orchard the apple bud was ripe. It was the eve. There are 3 letters that you will not get.
In that poem, Eleanor Fargen was addressing the poet Edward Thomas, who was brought up in this very neighbourhood and lived in Shellgate Road, off the Northcote Road. He was killed on Easter Monday, 1917. Before he joined up, he had written these lines, connecting in an English scene with the terrible losses in Flanders. In memoriam, Easter 1915. The flowers left thick at nightfall in the wood this Eastertide, calling to mind the men, now far from home, who with their sweethearts should have gathered them, and will do never again.
Thomas was killed by blast from a German shell, but the shells fired by his battery were made in Britain, probably by women. Many worked in munitions factories. Hundreds were killed in the Silvertown explosion. Lottie Wiggins remembers her time at Chilwell.
In April 1960, Holly, a workmate of mine, and myself decided we would get a job on munitions. After some controversy, I was only 17 just, and the authorised age was 18. I was taken on as an overhead crane driver. We were taken over to the filled shell store, and to our consternation, we were told we were to be trained to drive the overhead cranes, which were suspended on rails in the roof of the building.
We could hardly believe our eyes. We had to climb a ladder to man the crane, and descend by way of a rope. Oh, I was never very brave, but this procedure fairly took the cake. If I failed to mount the ladder, I'd be out of work. So up I went. Sometime before I mastered the rope, though, my first impression of that store was sheer fright. Rows and rows of 6, 8 and 9 inch shells, not forgetting the 12-inch ones, which reached to my waist and higher. I hardly dare walk near them, but had to overcome this feeling. There were 15 bays in the store and 4 cranes in each. There were 2 cranes to each bay, 6 large wall cranes. These only travelled up the length of the wall, but the smaller ones went the whole length and loaded all the filled shells sent out from the factory to France.
We were on 8-hour shifts at first, but this changed to 12 hours. This meant 2 shifts instead of 3. 12 hours, Monday to Saturday, then we changed to 18 hours, going on duty at 6 o'clock, Saturday evening, and working till 2 o'clock, Sunday afternoon. Then, the opposite shift would take over and work through until Monday at 6 a.m, when we would resume normal 12-hour shifts. No one would work those long hours today. The unions would step in. Of course, this was war, and everyone was out to get results. Soon the weekly output of filled shells reached 130,000, which required 900 tons of amateur. Practically every big shell fired by the British during the Battle of the Somme was filled at Chilwell.
Lord Chetwynd describes one of the problems he encountered in running a munitions factory largely staffed by women. At this factory, it was found that a certain percentage of the women, not a large one, spent a very considerable amount of their working time in the latrines gossiping, instead of remaining in the far better atmosphere of properly ventilated workshops. This was most undesirable from a health point of view, obviously, and a very considerable amount of working time was lost by the practice. I tried the system of lavatory cards in one department, and among the women, under those who adopted regular habits and thereby did not waste their time gossiping would benefit by a small sum weekly. Having tried it in one department for a few weeks with admirable results, I decided to extend it and have done so. The large bulk of the operatives to whom the tickets have been applied like the system and are thoroughly happy and contented, and I have not the slightest intention of modifying the system in any way. However, I got hold of the following lines, written by an employee, and had them printed.
All tickets, please. Hurrah for old England, the land of the free. We have tickets for butter, for sugar, for tea. Also tickets for breakfast, for pudding and dinner. You can take it for granted, the word of a sinner. We have now reached the limit, I'm sure you'll agree, when I tell you we've got to have tickets to pay.
When this war's at an end, and they've done making shells, and our Tommies return from the trenches like swells, and the Kaiser is hanged on a sour apple tree with his lunatic son, we shall go on the spree. But Tommy will swear, and I think you'll agree, agree, should he find we've been forced to have tickets to P.
Dear friends, to a close, I must now bring this rhyme.
As I've wasted enough of your valuable time,
we shall stick to our work till this blooming war's o'er.
And then I expect you will want us no more.
But while we remain, we shall never agree to the order that we must have tickets to P.
Thousands of copies were sold at a few pence each, and all the funds went to the Red Cross. But the author was furious.
Many other women nursed in hospital those who had come back wounded from France. Eva Dubel, who was a nurse, wrote,
Gramophone tunes. Through the long ward, the gramophone grinds out its nasal melodies. Where did you get that girl? It shrills. The patients listen at their ease, through clouds of strong tobacco smoke. The gramophone can always please. The Welsh boy has it by his bed. He's lame. One leg was blown away. He'll lie propped up with pillows there and wind the handle half the day. His neighbour, with a shattered arm, picks out the records he must play. Jock, with his crutches, beats the time. The gunner, with his head close bound, listens with puzzled, patient smile. Shell shock. He cannot hear a sound. The others join in from their beds and send the chorus rolling round. Somehow for me these common tunes can never sound the same again. They're magic now to thrill my heart and bring before me, clear and plain, man that is master of his flesh and has the laugh of death and pain.
One song that became very famous during the war, because it was in Picardy, in northern France, that some of the fiercest fighting took place. And many who heard this song at home were thinking of loved ones over there.
Roses are shining in Picardy, in the hush of the silvery dew. Roses are flowering in Picardy, but there's never a rose like you. And the roses will die with the summertime, and our paths may be far, far apart. But there's one rose that dies not in Picardy. That's the rose that I keep in my heart.
Margaret Postgate Cole, whose brother was actually in prison as a conscientious objector, met a soldier back from the front.
The Veteran, May 1916. We came upon him sitting in the sun, blinded by war, and left. And past the fence there came young soldiers from the Hand and Flower, asking advice of his experience. And he said this and that, and told them tales, and all the nightmares of each empty head blew into air. Then, hearing us beside, poor chaps, how'd they know what it's like, he said. And we stood there and watched him as he sat, turning his sockets where they went away. Until it came to one of us to ask, and you're how old? 19, 3rd of May.
In 1916, conscription came in. Military Service Act 1916.
Every unmarried man of military age, not accepted or exempted under this Act, can choose one of two courses.
1. He can enlist at once and join the colours without delay.
Or 2, he can attest at once under the group system and be called up in due course with his group.
If he does neither, a third course awaits him. He will be deemed to have enlisted under the Military Service Act on Thursday, March the 2nd, 1916.
And he will be placed in the reserve and be called up in his class as the military authorities may determine. In other words, there was
no way out.
One soldier poet of the day, Rupert Brooke, who himself died in 1915 en route for Gallipoli, expressed the patriotic idealism of many others in his most famous poem, The Soldier.
If I should die, think only this of me, that there's a corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by sons of home. And think, this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind no less, gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sound, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends and gentleness in hearts at peace under an English heaven.
But other corners of the battlefield were forever Ireland. On July the 31st, 1917, Lance Corporal Francis Ledridge, Royal Inniskillings Fusiliers, then 29, was repairing roads for the advance on Passchendaele. A poet, nationalist, and a trade union organiser, he had enlisted in the British Army, finding it not incompatible with his nationalism and believing it furthered the cause of independence.
I joined because Britain stood between Ireland and an enemy common to our civilization, and I would not have her say that she defended us while we did nothing at home but pass resolutions. He fought neither for a principle, nor a people, nor a law, but for the fields along the Boyne, for the birds and the blue skies over them.
He survived the disastrous Gallipoli campaign of 1915 and in 1916 was sent to Macedonia, suffering untold hardships in the bitterly cold Balkan winter. In the Salonika campaign, which killed many of his mainly Catholic regiment, he collapsed and was taken to hospital in Cairo.
A Church of England clergyman seemed to be taking a great interest in me and promised me a book of poetry. But suddenly he saw my chart that I was a Roman Catholic and hurried from me as if I were possessed. He's never spoken to me since, although he has been in the ward many times. I wonder if God asked our poor chaps whether they were RCs or C of E's when they met him.
In an English hospital in 1916, Ledwidge heard the news of the Easter uprising. Its 15 leaders, including his fellow poet Thomas MacDonagh and others, were court-martialed and executed in the very barracks where he had received his military training. Like every Irishman in the army, Ledwidge was shocked, for he wore the same uniform as the men who shot his comrades. His heart was with the rebels. Later, on leave in Dublin, he saw the ruins of the post office following the rising. To a British officer deriding the rebels, Ledwidge replied that he had fought and been wounded on 2 battlefields, foolishly believing that he was fighting for Ireland too.
Once he was fit, he was returned to active service on the Western Front. On the first day of Passchendaele, his working party, drenched to the skin, were laying wooden planks on a muddy track so that guns could be taken forward to the front line, and had paused for a mug of tea when a shell exploded and mutilated the men terribly. Francis Ledwidge was killed instantly and could be identified only by his identification disc. He was buried on the spot.
His pre-war poetry had rejoiced in pastoral Irish scenes and tales of the fairies, but later he had written, "A keen-edged sword, a soldier's heart, is greater than a poet's art, and greater than a poet's fame, a little grave that has no name." His grave in Artillery Wood Cemetery, Deeper, does have his name on it.
In England, young Vera Britton envied other girls who had volunteered to be nurses.
I went to have my photo taken this morning. I'm longing for the one of Roland, about whom I think about every time I see soldiers, nearly all day as they're stationed at the Empire Hotel, and I cannot go out without meeting any of them. In the evenings, the park is crowded with Tommies walking out with girls. This evening, we had a variety entertainment, the proceeds going to provide comforts for the soldiers. There were classical dances, songs by the adjutant's wife, comic songs by young Jellicoe, a subaltern, very popular and jolly, and also a sketch entitled Blackmail. It all went down very well, especially Jellicoe's songs. All the Tommies crowded about the building joined in the choruses.
Temporary Red Cross nurses such as Leslie Duncan and Nancy Garland were selling programs. It is an excellent thing for these idle people to have to do something as strenuous and useful as scrubbing floors and carrying dishes, which I saw them employed in at the Devonshire Hospital this morning. I quite envy them, for it must be both useful and interesting in spite of the hardness and monotony of the work. Now I am so busy it is quite impossible for me to do anything of the sort, especially as they have more helpers almost than they want. But if the war had come 2 years ago, I should have been almost grateful to it for providing my unoccupied and unprofitable hours with employment.
At the front, the nurses in hospitals and casualty clearing stations, and young men in the trenches, like Siegfried Sassoon, who wrote the following poem, were facing the reality of war.
Died of wounds. His wet, white face and miserable eyes brought nurses to him more than groans and sighs. But hoarse and low and rapid rose and fell his troubled voice. He did the business well. The ward grew dark, but he was still complaining and calling out for "Dickie! Curse the wood! It's time to go!" Oh Christ, and what's the good? We'll never take it, and it's always raining. I wondered where he'd been, then heard him shout, "They snipe like hell! Oh Dickie, don't go out!" I fell asleep. Next morning he was dead, and some slight wound lay smiling on the bed.
Casualties were not always caused by enemy action. Sometimes bad military planning had dire results, even during training, before troops even reached the front. A young subaltern describes a parade waiting for inspection.
All Friday morning it snowed, and in the afternoon it rained. We left barracks at 11 a.m. for the review ground. Of course, the roads were awful, thick slush and mud, and naturally everyone had their boots full of water. Long before we had completed the 7 miles to the ground, most of us were wet to the skin. Well, we got to the ground at 1:30 p.m. Kitchener didn't turn up till 4 p.m, and then only went by in a closed car, and we didn't even see him. Those 2.5 hours standing in water and slush over our ankles, wet through with a biting wind, driving sleet and heavy rain against you all the time, was about the nearest attempt at hell I have so far experienced. The only amusement was to count the people who fainted and had to be carried out. The engineers won with 32. Our company had 7 only. The scandal was that 12,000 men had been brought out 7 miles from home, with 1 ambulance wagon to hold 6. The remainder had to lie in the slush, some almost covered, until help arrived. Of course, some suffered from exposure. Fortunately, only 2 died.
In the trenches, the Tommies sang with mournful stoicism.
If the sergeant steals your rum, never mind. If the sergeant steals your rum, never mind. Though he's just a blinking sot, let him have the money or not. If the sergeant steals your rum, never mind.
The new army training at home was still in good spirits.
The men were entirely ignorant of discipline and often uncouth. But they worked splendidly together and seemed to enjoy the novel life. Laughter in the ranks was a very common occurrence. I remember on route marches having to stop my men making excessively rude remarks to people who passed on bicycles. We used to march to and from Lord's Cricket Ground and Hampstead Heath, singing our marching songs and thoroughly enjoying the whole business. Our favourite song was Mary Had a Little Lamb, and was remarkable for having 11 verses, only one of which was respectable, and that one was usually left out.
In France, the war dragged on. Santa Singh, a wounded Sikh soldier, wrote from hospital to his mother in India.
Many sons of mothers, brothers of sisters, and brothers of mothers have been lying dead for a whole year on the field of battle. A year has passed, and there they lie. He who sees them for the first time says that there is no place left empty. All the ground is covered with corpses, and all have perished in 40 seconds. As a man climbs the plum tree and shakes down the plums so that they fall and lie in heaps, so are men here fallen. They too are the children of mothers.
When a soldier was killed at the front, his platoon commander had to write to the dead man's next of kin. Here a young Scots officer, Hewitt Mackintosh, who a few months later was himself killed in action, writes:
In memoriam, Private David Sutherland, killed in the German trench. So you were David's father, and he was your only son. And the new cut peaks are rotting, and the work is left undone because of an old man weeping, just an old man in pain, for David, his son David, that will not come again. Oh, the letters he wrote you, and I can see them still, not a word of the fighting, but just the sheep on the hill, and how you should get the tops in ere the year got stormier. The Boche got his body, and I was his officer. You were only David's father, but I had 50 sons when we went up in the evening under the arch of the guns, and we came back at twilight. Oh God, I heard them call to me for help and pity that could not help at all. Oh, never will I forget you, my men that trusted me, more my sons than your fathers, for they could only see the little helpless babies and the young men in their pride. They could not see you dying and hold you while you died. Happy, young and gallant, they saw their firstborn go, but not the strong limbs broken and the beautiful men brought low, the piteous rising bodies. They screamed, "Don't leave me, sir!" For they were only your fathers, but I was your officer.
Here, Siegfried Sassoon, a young officer on leave from the front, is shocked by the thoughtless jingoism of civilians when he goes to a London music hall.
Blighters. The house is crammed. Tier beyond tier, they grin and cackle at the show, while prancing ranks of harlots shrill the chorus, drunk with gin. We're sure the Kaiser loves our dear old tanks. I'd like to see a tank come down the stalls, lurching to ragtime tunes or Home Sweet Home. And there'll be no more jokes in music halls to mock the riddled corpses around Balham.
The troops themselves sang about life at the front.
Hush, here comes a whiz-bang. Hush, here comes a whiz-bang. Now you soldiers, get down the stairs, down in your dugouts and say your prayers. Hush, here comes a whiz-bang, and it's making straight for you. And you'll see all the wonders of no man's land if the whiz-bang hits you.
Life could be short on the Western Front, and for the average young second lieutenant, hardly out of school, the life expectation was 3 weeks or less. Vera Britton and her parents saw her brother off to war.
I managed to get 10 minutes respite from the hospital, later to see him off by the 9:50. We all assembled there on the station, Edward and I, soldier and nurse, and mother and daddy. Fortunately, we hadn't long to wait. We were all calm and cheerful and talked of nothing in particular. I looked long and carefully at Edward as he stood there, tall and sunburned, the typical soldier. I was committing his image to my mind. I wish I'd done the same with Roland, but I felt too half-crazed the morning he went away to have presence of mind for any such thing.
As the train went out, I stood and waved to him, with a sick sense that it was perhaps for the very last time in these our short years. So we have seen him off. To France, the Dardanelles, Persian Gulf, what matter which? In all these stricken countries there are thousands of British graves, and there is so little reason to hope that what one loves best may not make one mourn. Fortunately, the station had not the desolate look it had when Roland departed. There was no icy stillness, no snowy roofs, no pitiless gleaming rails to make matters worse. Edward just went. That was all. And I said au revoir, but he said goodbye.
Roland, he went away to do his bit the other day, with a smile on his lips and his lieutenant's bits upon his shoulders, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said, "Remember me to all the birds." Then he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic words: "Goodbye, goodbye, wipe the tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know I'll be tickled to death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, now blue toodaloo, goodbye."
Now blue. British troops often needed to talk to French civilians. A page from What You Want to Say in French and How to Say It.
One very useful phrase has many meanings.
I have none.
You have none.
There are none.
There are no more.
There never were any.
It's no good.
I am no more.
Il n'y en a plus.
No.
Blue.
I want to go home. I don't
poppy appeal and a display. See you in the second half.